another of the great poets from the West. I don't know very much about him. No one else really seems to. Was a man named Arthur Chapman. Don't know whether he cowboyed all his life or whether he came from back east or where he came from. His book was published by Houghton Mifflin in the early 1900s, called Out Where the West Begins. With Chapman, again, the poems that I like best are not the poems that are the most popular, that most people are aware of. Again, I go to the poems I think that where he talks about the people. This is one of my favorite of the Arthur Chapman poems. It's called The Old Timer. He showed up in the springtime when the geese began to honk. He signed up with the outfit, and we fattened up his bronc. His chaps were old and tattered, but he never seemed to mind, 'cause for worrying and fretting he had never been designed. He's the type of cattle puncher that has vanished now, of course, with his $100 saddle on his $20 horse. He never seemed to worry over fortune's ups and downs. He never quit his singing, and the gang was full of frowns. He'd lose his roundup money in an hour of swift play, but he never seemed discouraged when he ambled on his way. He would hit the trail a-singing, and his smile was out full force, though he'd lost his fancy saddle and he didn't have a horse. I have wondered where he wanders in these late degenerate years, when there are no boundless ranges and there are no longhorn steers. But I'll warrant he is cheerful, though unfriendly is the trail, and his cigarette is glowing, though his grub supply may fail. For he'd had life's happy secret, he had traced it to the source, in his $100 saddle on his $20 horse. The other Chapman poem I like is called The Meeting. The Old Timer is about a man. The Meeting is about a horse and a man. It's about a cowboy that is in town and runs across a cow pony. The Meeting. When walking down a city street 2,000 miles from home, pavestones hurting to the feet that never ought to roam. A pony just reached to one side and grabs me by the clothes. He smelled the sagebrush during his hide, you bet a pony knows. I stopped and petted him and seen a brand upon his side. I'll bet across the prairie green he used to hit his stride. Some puncher of the gentle cow had owned him, that I knows, which same is why he just says, how, there's sagebrush in your clothes. He knowed the smell. No doubt it waked him out of some bright dream. In some far stream his thirst is slaked. He sees the mountains gleam. He bears his rider far and fast, and real the whole thing grows, when I come sort of drifting past with sagebrush in my clothes. Poor little hoss, it's tough to be away from that fair land, away from that wide prairie sea with all its vistas grand. I feel for you, old horse, I do. It's hard the way life goes. I'd like to travel back with you, back where that sagebrush grows. Most of you have heard, I'm sure, Curley Fletcher's work, even though you might not have heard of Curley Fletcher. Curley Fletcher wrote the Strawberry Roan, which was one of the most popular cowboy poems that was ever written. It was made into songs, recorded by practically everybody that did a Western song. The Sons of the Pioneers and Rex Allen and Gene Autry and everyone made a cut of the Strawberry Roan. But Curley Fletcher was a real old-time cowboy. He was there when all this was going on, just as was Badger Clark and Arthur Chapman. My favorite Curley Fletcher poem, again, is not one that most people know. Cowboys a lot of times were not particularly financially responsible because everybody took care of them. They really didn't have a lot of respect for money, it doesn't appear. They'd go to town and spend all their money because when they left town and went back out on the ranch, they were taken care of completely. Everything they needed was supplied for them. Occasionally they'd find themselves in a little bit of a bind and they'd have to do whatever was at hand to keep the belly button off the backbone, as they used to say. And this next poem is called The Sheepherders Lament. And Curley Fletcher apparently found himself broke and had to do a little work he wasn't inclined to talk about, except in this poem. He says, I have summered in the tropics with the yellow fever chill. I've been down with the scurvy. I've had every ache and ill. I have wintered in the Arctic, frostbitten to the bone. I've been in a Chinese dungeon where I spent a year alone. I've been shanghaied on a whaler and stranded on the deep, but I never knew what misery was till I started herding sheep. The camp boss now is 2 weeks late, the burro dead 3 days. The dogs are all sore-footed, but the sheep have got to graze. They won't bed down till after dark, and they're off before the dawn. With their baaing and their blatting, they're scattered and they're gone. I smell their woolly stink all day. I hear them in my sleep. Oh, I never knew what misery was till I started herding sheep. My feet are sore, my boots wore out. I'm afraid I'll never mend. I've got to where a horny toad looks like a long-lost friend. The Spanish Inquisition might have been a whole lot worse if instead of crucifixion they'd had some sheep to nurse. Old Job had lots of patience, but he got off pretty cheap. He never knew what misery was, for he never did herd sheep. It's nice to tell the kids of the big old horny ram, the gentle soft-eyed mother ewe, woolly little lamb. It's nice to have your mutton chops and your woolen clothes to wear, but you never stop to give a thought to the man that put 'em there. The blind and deaf are blessed, and the cripples too that creep. They'll never know what misery is, for they never will herd sheep.